On May 19, 1977, Colleen Stan was hitchhiking from her home in Eugene, Oregon, to a friend's home in Northern California, where she was heading to a birthday party. The 24-year-old Cameron Hooker kidnapped the 20-year-old Stan after picking her up. Stan stated that she was an experienced hitchhiker and had allowed 2 rides to go past before accepting the ride with Hooker. She reportedly felt confident climbing into the blue van because Hooker's wife, Janice, and their baby were in the car. When they stopped at a gas station along the way, Stan went to use the restroom. A voice told me to run and jump out a window and never look back, she recalled. But she calmed her fears and returned to the car. According to Stan and Janice Hooker's testimonies, Hooker pulled off the highway and put a knife to Stan's throat once they were alone in an isolated area. She was subsequently locked in a wooden head box that was designed to prevent light, sound, and fresh air from entering. Janice had reached an agreement that he could capture a slave to take Janice's place, because up until that time, Cameron had been using Janice to act out sexual bondage. There was to be no penetrative sex with Stan, according to the agreement, but this later changed. On the first night of her kidnapping, Stan was strung up by her hands, physically attacked by Cameron, and left blindfolded and suspended while the pair had sex below her. Stan was tortured and kept locked in a box 23 hours a day until she was given a contract and forced to sign herself into slavery for life in January 1978. In view from the box, propped up against her purse under the bed, was a photo of Marie Elizabeth, a previous victim whose body was never found.
So every time I got in and out of the box, I saw this picture of this woman.
Cameron led Stan to believe that she was being watched by a large, powerful organization called the Company, which would painfully torture her and harm her family if she tried to escape. Stan subsequently became a slave, referred to as K, was forced to call Cameron master and was not allowed to talk without permission. Cameron soon started raping her, which consisted of oral rape. Cameron did not want to have vaginal sex with Stan because he considered that to be a breach in his agreement with his wife. Instead, he raped her vaginally and anally with implements. Following this, the Hooker family moved to a mobile home in Red Bluff with Stan, where she was kept locked in wooden boxes under the couple's waterbed. In 1978, Janice gave birth to a second child on the waterbed above Stan. Stan said that her faith in God and belief in a chance of escape helped her survive. Her greatest fear, which Cameron reinforced daily, was of the Company. To avoid painful punishments, Stan tried to comply with his commandments, which later led to her being allowed to go out to jog, work in the yard, care for the family's children in the mobile home, and help him build bigger accommodations, like an underground dungeon for more slaves. Even with an open door, neighbors, and a telephone, she made no attempt to escape as, according to Stan, her fear of the Company kept her from seeking help. Additionally, Stan was allowed to visit her family by herself in 1981, but did not reveal her situation due to her fear of the possible consequences. Her family thought she was involved in a cult because of her homemade clothes, lack of money, and absence of communication over the years. They did not want to pressure her, fearing she would stay away forever. The next day, Stan returned for a second visit, with Hooker posing as her boyfriend. At the trial, Stan explained that she was happy about visiting her family, who were therefore able to take a photograph of her and Cameron, happily smiling together. According to Stan, Hooker feared he had given his slave too much freedom and took her back to his mobile home, where he locked her in the wooden box under his waterbed. She remained in the box 23 hours a day. For the next 3 years, bodily functions were dealt with by her using a bedpan, which she positioned under herself with her feet. It was stated in court that Hooker's children were told Kay had gone home. However, once his children had gone to bed, Hooker would take Stan out of the box to feed and torture her. She was reportedly not allowed to make any noise.
And he kind of slithered up next to me and he says, "Go ahead and scream, I'll cut your vocal cords, I've done it before."
And had to lie still, 23 hours at a time in the dark, with little air to breathe. During the summers, conditions were especially harsh on her, as the temperature in her box would rise to over 100 Fahrenheit and 38 Celsius. To feed herself, she ate scraps of food. It was not until 1983 that Stan was reintroduced to the children and neighbors. She was also allowed to get a job as a maid at a motel. Hooker wanted Stan to become his second wife, which was a turning point for Janice. Janice confessed that, starting with their first date, she had also been tortured, brainwashed, and referred to as a whore over the years by Cameron. Janice further stated that she survived their relationship by engaging in denial and compartmentalization. By August 1984, Janice began struggling with herself and went to Stan in order to inform her that Hooker was not part of the company. However, she maintained that the organization did exist. In a televised interview for Girl in the Box, Stan told the interviewer that she then went to a bus station and phoned Hooker to inform him that she was leaving him, and that he reacted by bursting into tears. Stan subsequently caught a bus home. In the months that followed, she did not contact the police, but continued to call Hooker regularly. She explained this at the trial by saying that she wanted to give Hooker, at Janice's request, a chance to reform. 3 months later, Janice reported her husband to the police. She informed that Cameron had kidnapped, tortured, and murdered Marie Elizabeth Spanhake, who had disappeared on January 31, 1976. Authorities were unable to locate the remains of the woman due to the lack of physical proof. No murder charge was brought. Chris Hatcher, a forensic psychologist and criminal profiler, testified for Cameron's prosecution at the start of the 1985 trial, and Janice testified against her husband in exchange for full immunity. In the end, Hooker was sentenced to consecutive prison terms, totaling 104 years for sexual assaults, kidnapping, and using a knife in the process, originally ineligible for parole until 2020. 3. He had his hearing date moved up 7 years to 2015 by California's Elderly Parole Program. On April 16, 2015, his request for parole was denied, and Hooker will be eligible for another hearing in 2030. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, California officials contacted Stan and advised her that they were looking into possibly granting Hooker parole in March 2021. Instead of a parole hearing, authorities scheduled a hearing in September 2021 to decide if Hooker should be classified as a sexually violent predator, which would result in his civil commitment to a state hospital. After the trial, Stan studied for an accounting degree and, as reported by Mara Bofson in a March 9, 2014, New York Daily News article, tried to move on to a normal life. But misery followed her, a string of failed marriages and a troubled child, now in jail. Stan also joined and volunteered for Reading Women's Refugee Center, an organization to help abused women. Janice reverted to her maiden name, Lashley, became a registered associate social worker, and has worked as a mental health professional. Stan has changed her last name. Both Janice and Stan continue to live in California until nowadays.